All right, I want to begin this segment by talking about just the idea that when these people wake up, as we've just seen Swedenborg's example of how that can happen, that they are overjoyed that they are alive again, and then they are met by friends and relatives who take them off and show them around. And I want to read you about that. There's a couple of great quotes here. This is from Afterlife, page 4, if you wanted to come along with me. We are still together in that world and can talk to anyone we want to talk to friends and acquaintances from our physical life, especially husbands and wives and also brothers and sisters. I have seen a father talking with his sons and recognizing them. I have seen many other people with their different relatives and friends. However, since they were different character, at least these he's talking about, because of their life in the world, they parted after a little while. You know, this one where he talks about seeing a father talking to his sons reminds me of another story Swedenborg relays about the afterlife, and that is that there was a father whose son had passed on before him, and his father had visited that son. And when his father had come back, Swedenborg saw that this hardened businessman was crying, just crying his eyes out. And he said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I just spoke to my son, and my son spoke from so much love. It was like love itself speaking." It's just a beautiful, beautiful story of a father and son being reconnected. But here's another one for you. Immediately after our life in the world, our friends and people we had known in the world recognize us. They recognize us in the other world. As soon as we arrive in the other life, we are recognized by our friends and our relatives and by people we had known in one way or another. I have heard many people who had just come from the world overjoyed to see their friends again, and their friends overjoyed that they had arrived. It often happens that married partners meet and welcome each other joyfully. Swedenborg talks about a little further on that sometimes when married partners see each other and they rejoice, they actually congratulate each other that they made it. You made it! Yeah, we're both together again. Just again, an awesome reunion taking place in the other world. Now, what's interesting is that, of course, people who have the near-death experience talk about this so much, of meeting friends and relatives who had passed on before them, that they are there to greet them into this new world. So Moody says on, it's actually page 48 of his book, Life After Life, this is somebody he's quoting, "They were all people I had known in my past life, but who had passed on before. I recognized my grandmother and a girl I had known when I was in school and many other relatives and friends. They all seemed pleased. It was a very happy occasion." In another place, Moody says on page 50, he says, "In very few instances, people who have come to believe that these beings they encountered were their guardian spirits. A woman told me that as she was leaving her body, she detected the presence of 2 other spiritual beings there, and that they identified themselves as her spiritual helpers." So what's really interesting about that is Swedenborg says, talks about that there are 2 heavenly or celestial angels that are with someone when they wake up in the other world. And that is often reported by people who have the near-death experience. Sometimes it's just friends and relatives, but a lot of times it's people that are guardians or identify themselves as angelic beings, and that sometimes they see 2, just as Swedenborg talks about, with them. Now, you might remember what Swedenborg said about when these angels, these 2, were with him and were guiding his thoughts. I just want to read that to you again because this really fits with something that people say about the near-death experience. I'm going to give it to you right away. Thought transfer. So listen to this. "The angels who were sitting beside my head were silent, simply sharing their thoughts with mine. When these are accepted by the deceased, the angels know that the spirit is ready to be let out of the body. They accomplish this sharing of thoughts by looking into my face. This is actually how thoughts are shared in heaven." And that is one of the most common things people talk about when they are with their friends and relatives, or later on, as we'll see, when they meet this being of light or talk to angels or whatever, that there's this thought transfer going on completely, that they look at each other and they seem to understand what they're saying. Oftentimes, when we get into people who have had an out-of-body experience as they're dying, they can look at the doctors and nurses or family members, and just before that family member says something, they hear it. They hear the person saying it in their mind. So there's something going on here that both people who have had the near-death experience talk about, and also Swedenborg, about this thought being transferred without actually having to use a voice. Now, later on, we're going to see in heaven, there's actually something that Swedenborg calls a universal language of heaven, where people actually do use their voices at the same time as facial expressions. But he also talks about, even within that, there's incredible thought transfer taking place so that we understand people 1,000 times better than we do here on earth just by hearing and looking at what they're saying inside. So another one, I think, is that when, out-of-body experience, we already talked about that, how people find themselves outside of their body. And this is one of those things, again, that is just phenomenal because scientists really don't know how this happens. I mean, maybe because there's a spirit that can be apart from the body. I don't know. But it's really interesting that people come outside of their bodies. They can feel, a lot of times they actually describe it, and you can see from some of the videos online, they say, I felt my spirit being drawn out of my head. In fact, several use the word, I felt like it was being vacuumed out of my head, and then I found myself popped outside of my body. And Swedenborg, maybe this is about this, or maybe not, but he does say that I was enabled to perceive and to even feel that there was a pull, a kind of drawing out of the deeper levels of my mind, and therefore my spirit from the body as he was going through this resuscitation. So even there, I mean, is that an out-of-body experience? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. In another book, Swedenborg actually refers to an out-of-body experience that someone else, a friend of his, was having, where he actually said him and his friend who had deceased witnessed the friend's funeral. So they're talking to each other, and he's there and he's watching his own funeral. Well, that's quite the out-of-body experience, but that's not here in the afterlife. That's elsewhere in Swedenborg's teachings. He mentions that in one of his notes. Now, another one that's just really pretty amazing that you can see from the reading is that Swedenborg talks about that we are in complete human form. In fact, it's a heading, in Swedenborg's afterlife. People are in complete human form. And he goes on to talk about their senses are just as good, if not better, that they have arms, legs, hands, feet, everything that, we have in this world, that they are whole. And it's really interesting that, again, that's what people who have had the near-death experience say. They said, sometimes they see themselves as glowing forms or whatever, but as Moody says and others have said later, it's almost universal that they see themselves in a body, in a similar body than what we have here on earth. Arms, legs, hands, feet. There's something about that human form that is incredibly special as we are made in God's image. But it was interesting that in the near-death experience, people even talk about that people who were blind or partially blind said when they came back that they could actually see. Okay? People who had lost limbs in this new world said their limbs were there, that they were whole. And one of those can be found in Moody's book, Life After Life, on page 45, where this is from a man who lost his leg in the event of dying. And he says, I could feel my body and it was whole. I know that. I felt whole. And I felt that all of me was there, though it wasn't. In other words, he had died and that body that he had left behind wasn't all there. But in this new realm, it was. So both talk about that human form as being whole. And I think that's very comforting to a lot of people, that in that other world, however you died or whatever circumstances you may have had in this world, in that other world, you're going to be whole and you're going to be healthy. Now, going along with that idea, Swedenborg talks about that people have keener senses in this other world. And this is from Afterlife, page 17. People who are in heaven have far more delicate senses. That is, they see and hear and also think more discerningly than they had in the world. This is because they are seeing in heaven's light, which vastly surpasses the world's light, and they hear by way of spiritual atmosphere that vastly surpasses the atmosphere here on earth. And again, as we have seen, or as you can study, people who have had the near-death experience talk about this too. Their senses were way more keen, as Swedenborg says. That, they could see better, even if they couldn't see that better in the world. They could hear better. What they touched, they could sense so much more. I like to think about it in terms of, in this world, it's a very dense and heavy world, as Swedenborg says. And so it's almost like our spirits are inside our body are like in a spacesuit. We can touch something and, we can, kind of feel it, the pressure or whatever, but, there's this suit that we have on that just numbs us up a little bit. Well, when we die, our spirits come outside of that spacesuit, and what we touch in the spiritual realm, it's alive. It's right there. What we see is alive. What we hear is alive on so many different levels. And so even here, Swedenborg says it's not just that we can see and hear better, we can think more clearly. And that goes along again with people who have had the near-death experience. Talk about the illumination that they have. That, in fact, it's almost a quote from Swedenborg and the people from the near-death experience. Almost identical quoting someone from the near-death experience saying, while I was in that light, let's say in the presence of that being, I understood everything. But then when I came back in my body, I was so upset because I kind of lost it. I don't understand it anymore. Swedenborg almost uses that same phrase. He says, when I was in the light of heaven, I understood so much, and I was kind of mad that when I got back into the body, it all became vague to me again. But look at that and flip it around, what it's going to be like when we enter that world, and just that clarity of thought, the clarity of everything about our bodies and our minds in that state. Because everybody says that's the way it's going to be. Now, just one more that really want to dwell on a little bit more, and that is the life review that people have. Now, in the near-death experience, this review can be different in different ways. It's always looking at it from a third person, right down, and some people see everything. In an instant, but they see everything. They see themselves being born. They see themselves playing with their toys. They see themselves in high school, college, all the way through every single part of their lives. And some people just see highlights. Generally, there's no judgment involved in this. We talked about that already. And it's just an experience where they get to sum up who they are in their lives and what they've become, so to speak. Well, Swedenborg talks about this in different ways. One of those things is where people are amazed that they can remember every single detail of their lives. Well, in this reading that we just read, Swedenborg talks about that our memory is completely intact. Everything we experienced in this world is written, so to speak, on our souls. In other words, everything that we are is a product of our memory and our choices. So that it's the exact same thing. No wonder we can remember, if we have a life review, every single part of it, because we haven't lost anything. It's all there. It's all intact. And so Swedenborg says when people look at you, they can see your life. Angels, they see what you've been through. They see everything about you and where you are now in life. And Swedenborg says that's the book of life that the Lord talks about in the New Testament. The book of life is really people just seeing us for who we really are. But there's another part that there's also a review in here that we're reading about. And this is a very particular review. It seems it only happens to hypocrites. Actually, it happens to people who will not live up to what they did wrong. And apparently in the other life, you can believe something so strongly or fake somebody out so much that they really cannot see who you are. And sometimes they need a little help to say, okay, well, maybe I'm not that good of a person. So in this case, there are people who are so good at faking it that they're really not moving forward. Like, say, people that really are not good people need to start moving forward to their eternal destination. But they could fake it. And I think the way to look at this, why is a pathological liar so good at lying? I ask my students this all the time. They always know the answer, because they believe what they're saying. Yes, in that moment, they choose to believe what they're saying because it makes it so much of a better story. It's so, believable. Anyway, so there are these people in the other world, the hypocrites, they're so, oh yeah, I'm a good person, this and that. And the angels will go, and this is my words, oh yeah? Well, let's watch this. Here's a scene out of your life. Do you remember doing this? and some of the more terrible things. Do you remember you murdered that person, and here's what happened, and da da da. And you can imagine the people going, oh no, oop, jigs up, you're right, yep, got me there, and they go through that process so that they will own it. So they will own who they are, so that they will come into touch with who they are and not fake it anymore. In a lot of ways, it's so that they could come into their own integrity of who they are. There's not, the outside matches the inside. That's true with good people. They do that naturally. It doesn't seem that they have to go through that kind of review, but there are certain people who are stuck, so to speak, or get themselves stuck, and they have to go through this review so that they will let go, they will own it, and they will keep on moving forward in their journey. Okay, so that's a cool thing too that's talked about there. And then finally, just the one that both say, I won't have to read anything here, but both people who have had the near-death experience in Swedenborg say when they are coming to their final destination, or even when they're on that path, they feel like they're coming home. And what a beautiful thing that is. When some movies or books talk about, well, the Lord's calling me home, the old person will say while they're passing in the other world. And I never really understood that, but because, I've never been there before, have I? But I'm going there. But I think what it is that, when you get there, you feel so connected to the people, friends and relatives, to the people who are like you. You feel so connected to the Lord, that being of light, whatever you want to call it, that's pure love coming to you, that, wow, I'm coming home. And there are so many more similarities, but I just wanted to hit on some of those and show you just in this first section that we read. It's amazing the similarities between Swedenborg and the near-death experience. Thanks for joining us for that last session. And now I've got some homework for you. You don't have to do it. But if you do, you'll be more prepared for our next time if you join us. And that is reading Afterlife 29 through 42. It's about becoming who you really are. So thanks for joining us, the Swedenborg Institute for Special Studies in all different kinds of ways. It's a beautiful thing. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Hi, I'm Grant Schnarr. Hi, I'm Grant Schnarr, associate person.